The stone steps were slick with early winter frost, and Kira Bloodmoon had only a heartbeat to register the hatred in her husband's eyes before his hands connected with her shoulders. She didn't scream as she fell. There wasn't time. The world became a blur of gray stone and black sky, her body tumbling end over end down the ancient staircase that led from the Frostborn packhouse into the ravine below. Each impact sent fresh agony radiating through her. Shoulder against granite, hip cracking against the edge of a step, her head glancing off the worn stone with enough force to turn her vision white at the edges. The baby. Her mind shrieked through the chaos. The baby. The baby. The baby. She clawed desperately at the steps as she fell, her fingernails tearing against the rough surface, leaving bloody trails in her wake. But there was nothing to grip, nothing to stop her momentum, and the darkness of the ravine yawned beneath her like a hungry mouth waiting to swallow her whole. Above her, silhouetted against the cold light spilling from the packhouse windows, Owen Frostborn stood watching. His wedding finery, the ceremonial black coat, the silver chains of his alpha status, made him look like a beautiful statue carved from shadow and moonlight. The face she had once thought handsome, had once traced with trembling fingers while believing the lies he whispered in her ear, was now twisted into something monstrous. "Stupid bitch!" he called down after her, his voice carrying clearly in the frozen air. "Did you really think I would let you trap me with a whelp? That I would allow any child of mine to grow into a challenger?" Kira's body hit the small landing halfway down the stairs, and she felt something crack in her ribcage. The pain was extraordinary, bright and terrible and all-consuming. She gasped for air and tasted blood on her tongue, and still she tried to reach for her wolf, tried to find that inner flame that should have roared to life to protect her unborn child. But there was nothing. Her wolf was silent, distant, barely a whisper of what she should have been. "Why won't you answer me? Why can't I feel you?" The answer came in fragments as she continued to tumble down the remaining steps. The tea Owen had been bringing her every morning for the past 3 months. The special herbs he said would help her sleep, would ease the anxiety of their upcoming wedding. She had been so grateful for his attentiveness, had taken his care as a sign of the love he professed. She had drunk every cup he offered and thanked him for his kindness. Poison. He had been poisoning her all along. The realization hit her with almost as much force as the final impact when she reached the bottom of the stairs and her body slammed into the frozen ground at the edge of the ravine. She lay there, broken and bleeding, staring up at the star-scattered sky through branches that looked like black veins against the heavens. "I'm going to die here. We're both going to die here." Her hand moved of its own accord, pressing against her still flat stomach where the tiniest spark of new life flickered. 6 weeks. She had only known for certain since this morning, when the healer had confirmed what she'd suspected. She had been so foolish, so desperately naive. She had run to Owen with joy shining in her eyes, had thrown her arms around his neck on their wedding day, and whispered the news like it was the greatest gift she could offer him. The memory of how his face had changed would haunt her for however many minutes she had left to live. The way his smile had frozen, then shattered. The way his eyes, those beautiful hazel eyes she had once loved, had gone cold and calculating as something dark moved behind them. "A child," he had repeated slowly, and she had been too stupid to recognize the danger in his voice. "You're carrying my child." "Our child," she had corrected, laughing, pressing his hand against her belly. "Owen, I know the timing isn't perfect, but isn't it wonderful? A new life, a new beginning for—" "Get away from me." He had shoved her back so hard she had stumbled into the stone wall of their wedding chamber. The impact had knocked the breath from her lungs, and by the time she had recovered enough to speak, to ask what was wrong, he had crossed the room and seized her by the hair. "You will not give me an heir," he had snarled, dragging her toward the door. "Not now. Not ever. Do you understand me, Kira? I did not murder my father to take this pack just to watch some mewling infant threaten my position. Murder, his father. Alpha Gregor Frostborn had died peacefully in his sleep just a month ago, or so everyone had believed. Owen had wept at the funeral, had accepted the pack's condolences with dignified grief, had worn the Alpha mantle with such apparent reluctance that even Kira had believed his sorrow was genuine. All lies. Every moment, every tender word, every promise. All lies. She had tried to fight him as he hauled her through the packhouse corridors, her bare feet slipping on the polished floors, her wedding gown tearing as she struggled against his grip. But Owen was an alpha in his prime, strong and fast and utterly without mercy, and Kira's wolf was too weak from months of poison to lend her any supernatural strength. Please, she had begged as he kicked open the door to the rear stairs, the ancient stone passage that led down to the ravine, where the pack disposed of things they wanted forgotten. Owen, please, I'll do anything. I'll take herbs to end the pregnancy. I'll leave the pack. I'll tell everyone the child died. Just please, please don't. You know what I did to become Alpha, he had interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. You know my secret now. Do you think I'm fool enough to let you live with that knowledge? He had smiled then, and it was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. A beautiful mask stretched over something rotten and wrong. The tragic Luna who fell on her wedding night. Such a terrible accident. The pack will mourn you, Kira. I'll make sure of it. And then he had pushed her, and she had fallen. And now she lay at the bottom of the ravine with broken ribs and blood in her mouth, and absolutely no hope of survival. The cold was creeping in. She could feel it seeping through her thin wedding gown, turning her fingers and toes numb, slowing the frantic pace of her heart. The baby. Her baby. Not his. Never his. She would never think of Owen when she thought of this child, was still alive inside her. She could sense that tiny flutter of life, fragile but stubborn, refusing to surrender. I'm sorry, she thought, tears freezing on her cheeks. I'm so sorry. I tried to protect you. I tried to find someone who would love us. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Above her, she heard Owen's footsteps retreating, heard the door to the pack house slam shut. He was done with her. She was already dead in his mind, already being erased from his memory like an inconvenient stain. Kira closed her eyes and waited for the end. But the end didn't come. Instead, she heard a sound that made no sense, the crunch of boots on frozen earth, moving toward her rather than away. A moment later, hands were sliding beneath her body, strong and impossibly warm against her frozen skin, and she was being lifted from the ground with a gentleness that made her gasp. Hold on. The voice was deep, roughened by something that sounded like barely contained rage, but the hands that held her were as careful as if she were made of spun glass. Don't you dare die. Hold on. Kira tried to open her eyes, tried to see who was touching her, who had found her in this forsaken place where no one ever came. But the darkness was rushing in now, the cold and the blood loss and the shock finally claiming her, and she felt herself slipping away from the world like water through cupped fingers. The last thing she registered before unconsciousness took her was a sound she had never heard before. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the very air around her, followed by a single word spoken with the weight of absolute certainty. Mine. Then there was nothing but darkness and warmth, and the distant, impossible sensation of safety. Alpha King Brennan Silvermane had not expected to find anything in this ravine except ghosts. He had been walking these lands for 3 days, moving through the unclaimed territory that bordered Frostborn Pack, with his senses on constant alert. His own pack, what remained of it, waited for him in a small camp 2 days' travel to the north, barely 30 wolves who had survived the massacre that had destroyed everything he had ever known. They were depending on him to find new territory, a place where they could rebuild, where they could become something more than a band of refugees skulking through the wilderness. He should not have stopped when he heard the sound of something falling. He should not have diverted from his careful route to investigate the commotion from the Frostborn packhouse. He was alone in potentially hostile territory, his strength still not fully recovered from the wounds he had taken in the final battle against the rogues who had slaughtered his people. And the last thing he needed was to draw the attention of another alpha. But something had pulled at him, some instinct buried deep in his bones that would not be denied. He had moved through the forest with predatory silence, following the sounds of shouting and the sickening thuds of a body hitting stone, until he had reached the edge of the ravine just in time to see a small figure in white hit the ground at the bottom of the ancient stairs. He had not thought. He had simply moved, and now he knelt in the frozen dirt with a dying woman in his arms, and his entire world had narrowed to the flutter of her heartbeat beneath her cracked ribs, and the second, smaller heartbeat that pulsed within her womb. The mate bond had hit him like a physical blow the moment his arms had closed around her. It was nothing like what the old stories described, not a gentle recognition, not a warm awareness of connection. It was a roar of possession and protectiveness that shook him to his core, a primal claim that he had never expected to feel again after 38 years of life without finding the one soul meant to match his own. Mate. Mine. Protect. Save. The thoughts were not fully human, not fully wolf. They came from somewhere deeper, somewhere more ancient. The place where instinct and magic intertwined into something that could not be denied. Brennan lifted his head and stared up at the packhouse windows, where warm light spilled out into the frozen night. Someone up there had done this. Someone had broken his mate, thrown her away like garbage, left her to die in the cold with his child still growing inside her. The growl that rose in his chest was a promise of blood and death, but he forced himself to swallow it down. Vengeance would come later. Right now, his mate needed him. He rose to his feet in one fluid motion, cradling her against his chest as if she weighed nothing. Her wedding gown was torn and stained with blood. Wedding gown. Something in him noted with terrible clarity, and the implications of that made his vision edge toward gold. And he could feel the wrongness in her body where bones had broken and organs had bruised. She should be dead. Anyone else would be dead. But there was something in her, some stubborn spark of will that refused to surrender, and it called to something equally stubborn in him. "You're going to live," he told her unconscious form as he began to move through the forest, carrying her toward the network of caves he had discovered during his scouting. "Do you hear me, mate? You're going to live, and your child is going to live, and whoever did this to you is going to pay with their life. I swear it on the bones of my ancestors." She couldn't hear him. He knew that. But he kept talking anyway, the words pouring out of him in a low, constant stream, promises and threats and vows that he would spend the rest of his life keeping, if only she would stay alive long enough to let him. The caves were 2 miles from the ravine, and by the time Brennan reached them, his mate's skin had gone terrifyingly pale, and her heartbeat had slowed to something that made his wolf howl with terror. He laid her down on his bedroll with exquisite care, then set about building a fire with hands that trembled despite his best efforts to steady them. When the flames were crackling and the cave was filling with warmth, he turned back to his mate and really looked at her for the first time. She was beautiful, even broken and bloody, even with bruises forming on her delicate features, and her long dark hair matted with dirt, and worse, she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Small and slender, with features that suggested both strength and gentleness, she looked like something precious that had been carelessly shattered by someone who didn't understand her value. Brennan's hands curled into fists at his sides as he catalogued her injuries. 3 cracked ribs, possibly 4. A hairline fracture in her skull. Extensive bruising across her shoulders and back. And beneath all of it, threaded through her blood like spider silk, the unmistakable taint of wolfsbane, not enough to kill immediately, but enough to weaken her wolf over time, to sever the connection between human and beast that made their kind what they were. Someone had been systematically destroying her. Not just tonight, but for weeks, maybe months. The same someone who had pushed her down those stairs. The same someone who had stood watching as she fell, who had called her stupid bitch and spoken of murder and heirs and threats to his power. I'm going to kill him, Brennan thought. And it was not a threat or a fantasy, but a simple statement of fact. I'm going to find whoever did this, and I'm going to tear out his throat, and I'm going to let her watch while the light leaves his eyes. But that was for later. Right now, his mate needed him. Brennan settled beside her, close enough to share his body heat, but not close enough to jostle her broken ribs. He dipped a cloth in the water skin he carried and began to carefully clean the blood from her face. His touch as gentle as if he were handling the most delicate glass. With each stroke, he murmured to her, nonsense words of comfort and promises of safety, the sounds meaning more than the actual meaning, letting his voice and his presence wrap around her like a second blanket. You're safe now, he told her as he worked. No one is going to hurt you again. You're mine, and I protect what's mine, and I will burn down every pack house in this territory before I let anyone lay a hand on you. She didn't respond. But as the night wore on and the fire burned low, and Brennan kept his endless vigil, he could have sworn her breathing grew a little easier, a little steadier, a little more like she was choosing to survive. Kira woke to warmth. It was such an alien sensation that for a long moment she simply lay still, her eyes closed, trying to understand how she could possibly feel anything other than the bone-deep cold that had been seeping into her as she lay broken at the bottom of the ravine. She should be dead. She knew she should be dead. Owen had made certain of it, had watched her fall with those cold, calculating eyes that she had once mistaken for love. But she wasn't dead. She was warm, impossibly warm, and there was something else. A warmth spreading through her like honey in sunlight, thick and achingly sweet. It pooled behind her sternum and radiated outward, filling spaces inside her that she hadn't even known were empty, and somewhere deep in her mind, in that place where her wolf had been silent for so long, something stirred. What is this? What's happening to me? Her wolf, her poor, poisoned, half-dead wolf, lifted her head and whined. It was the first sound the creature had made in weeks, the first sign of life from the part of herself that Owen had been systematically destroying, and the shock of it made Kira's breath catch in her throat. She opened her eyes. Firelight danced on rough stone walls, casting flickering shadows that moved like living things. She was in a cave, she realized slowly, her thoughts still sluggish from blood loss and trauma. A fire crackled nearby, its warmth washing over her in waves, and she was lying on something soft. A bedroll, perhaps, or a folded blanket, with another blanket tucked carefully around her broken body. But none of that mattered, because there was a man watching her. He sat on the other side of the fire, his massive frame somehow folded into stillness, and Kira's first coherent thought was that she had never seen anyone so dangerous in her life. He was huge, tall and broad-shouldered and built like a warrior, with muscles that moved beneath his simple clothing like coiled springs waiting to release. His hair was silver, not gray but actual silver, catching the firelight like polished metal and falling past his shoulders in waves that should have softened his appearance, but somehow only made him look more predatory. Scars marked his face, 3 pale lines that ran from his left temple to his jaw, and another that bisected his right eyebrow. And his features were harsh and angular, carved from stone rather than flesh. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath entirely. They were gold. Not hazel, Not amber, not any human shade that could be explained away by tricks of the light. They burned with the molten fire of a wolf in full dominance, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that made every nerve in her body sing with awareness. The sensation exploded through her. It hit her like a thunderclap, like a physical blow, and Kira gasped as the sensation flooded through her in a cascading wave. Heat pooled low in her belly, sudden and shocking. Her skin prickled with electricity, every inch of her aware of his presence in a way that transcended ordinary perception. She could smell him, pine and wood smoke, and something deeper, something wild and masculine that made her wolf howl with sudden, desperate recognition. Mate, mate, mate. The word rang through her mind like a bell being struck, and Kira's eyes went wide with shock. No, no, that wasn't possible. She was married, had been married for less than a day before her husband tried to murder her. And the mate bond was supposed to be rare, precious, once in a lifetime. She couldn't be feeling this. She couldn't be looking at this scarred, silver-haired stranger and feeling her entire soul reaching toward him like a flower turning toward the sun. But her wolf didn't care about logic or impossibilities. Her wolf was surging toward the surface for the first time in months, straining against the poison that had kept her caged, and the sound she made, a low, keening whine that Kira couldn't have stopped if her life depended on it, seemed to echo in the small cave like a confession. The man's reaction was immediate and devastating. His eyes flared brighter gold, so bright they seemed to glow in the firelight, and his massive body went rigid with tension. She heard him inhale sharply, a quick, harsh sound, and watched as his hands curled into fists against his thighs, his knuckles going white with the force of his grip. A growl rumbled from his chest, low and continuous, and it vibrated through the air between them like a physical thing, making her skin prickle and her heart race. Mate, he said, and the word came out rough, wrenched from somewhere deep inside him like prayer and curse combined. You're awake. Kira opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out. She was drowning in sensation, in the overwhelming awareness of him that pulsed through every fiber of her being. She could feel his emotions pressing against her consciousness, shock and wonder and fierce, terrible hope. And beneath it all, a protectiveness so absolute it took her breath away. He feels it too. He feels the bond. Terror crashed through her like a wave of ice water, cutting through the warmth and the wonder and the impossible rightness of what she was feeling. The last alpha she had trusted had thrown her down a flight of stairs. The last man who had claimed to care for her had been poisoning her for months, had murdered his own father for power, had tried to kill her and her unborn child, rather than allow them to threaten his position. She couldn't trust this. She couldn't trust him. No matter what her wolf was screaming, no matter how every cell in her body seemed to be reaching toward this stranger, she had learned her lesson in blood and broken bones. Don't, she whispered, and her voice came out cracked and hoarse, barely audible. Please don't. The man went completely still. For a long moment they simply stared at each other, his golden eyes locked with her dark ones, the fire crackling between them, the mate bond humming in the air like a living thing. Kira could see the war playing out across his scarred features, the struggle between instinct and intention, and she waited for him to move, to reach for her, to assert the claim that his wolf was so clearly demanding. But he didn't. Instead, slowly, deliberately, he raised his hands and held them palm out where she could see them. The gesture was universal. I mean no harm. And the fact that this massive, dangerous alpha was making it for her sent an unexpected ache through her. I'm not going to hurt you, he said, his voice still rough but more controlled now, as if he was forcing each word through a filter before it left his mouth. I know what you've been through. I can smell the poison in your blood and the fear on your skin. I know someone hurt you, someone who should have protected you. His jaw tightened, and she saw something murderous flash in his golden eyes before he banked it down again. I'm not him. I will never be him. And I will not touch you until you ask me to. Kira stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. No alpha had ever spoken to her like that. No man in power had ever looked at her the way this stranger was looking at her now, like she was something precious and breakable, like her consent mattered more than his desire, like the bond burning between them was something to be earned rather than claimed. "Who are you?" she managed finally, and her voice sounded like a stranger's, thin and trembling. "Brennan Silvermane," he answered, and the name struck a chord of recognition in her memory. The Alpha King, the wolf without a pack. She had heard stories, whispered tales of the massacre that had destroyed the Silvermane kingdom, of the rogues who had swept through their lands like a plague, of the survivors who were said to be rebuilding somewhere in the unclaimed territories. "I found you at the bottom of the ravine. You were dying. I brought you here to heal." "The baby," Kira gasped, and her hand flew to her stomach, pressing against the flat plain where new life still flickered. "Is the baby alive?" The word was immediate, absolute, and the relief that flooded through her was so intense it made her dizzy. "I can hear the heartbeat, strong and steady. Your child survived, Kira." She blinked. "How do you know my name?" "You spoke it in your sleep, among other things." His eyes darkened, and that murderous rage flickered across his features again before he controlled it. "You spoke of Owen, of what he did, of why he pushed you." Kira closed her eyes against the sudden sting of tears. She didn't want to cry in front of this stranger, didn't want to show any more weakness than she already had, but the memory of Owen's hands on her shoulders, of the hatred in his eyes as he sent her tumbling into darkness, was too fresh and too terrible to contain. "He killed his father," she heard herself whisper. "He murdered the old alpha to take the pack, and he poisoned me for months to weaken my wolf so I couldn't fight back. And when I told him I was pregnant, he—" Her voice broke, and she pressed her hands against her face, trying to hold herself together by force of will alone. "Kira." Her name on his lips made her tremble. "Look at me." She didn't want to. She wanted to curl into a ball and disappear, to let the darkness take her, to stop feeling anything at all. But something in his voice, some quiet command that had nothing to do with alpha dominance and everything to do with simple, honest entreaty, made her lower her hands and meet his golden gaze once more. "I cannot undo what was done to you," Brennan said, and each word was weighted with a gravity that seemed to settle into her bones. "I cannot take back the pain or the fear or the betrayal, but I can promise you this. As long as I draw breath, no one will ever hurt you again. You are my mate, my fated one, and I would rather tear out my own heart than see you harmed." The sincerity in his voice was overwhelming. She could feel it through the bond that pulsed between them, could sense the truth of his words in the very marrow of her being. He meant it, every syllable. He would die before he let anyone touch her. And that terrified her more than anything Owen had ever done, because she wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to lean into the warmth of the mate bond and let it carry her somewhere safe, somewhere she would never have to be afraid again, but wanting had never gotten her anything but pain. "I can't," she said, and watched something shatter in his golden eyes. "I'm sorry. I can't do this. I don't even know you and my wolf. She's been quiet for so long, and now she won't stop wanting you, and Kira." He hadn't moved, hadn't reached for her, hadn't done anything except hold perfectly still while she spiraled. "Breathe." She realized she had been hyperventilating, The cave seemed to spin around her, the firelight blurring at the edges, and she gasped for air that didn't seem to fill her lungs no matter how hard she tried. "Match my breathing," Brennan said, his voice calm and steady and impossibly soothing. "In through the nose, out through the mouth. That's it. Again and again." Slowly, by focusing on the deep rhythm of his breath, Kira managed to bring herself back from the edge of panic. Her heart rate slowed, the spinning stopped, and when she opened her eyes again, she found Brennan exactly where he had been before. Across the fire from her, his hands still raised in surrender, his golden eyes filled with patient concern. "I'm not asking you to trust me," he said quietly. "Trust must be earned, and you have every reason to be afraid of the men who claim power over you. But I am asking you to let me help you heal, to let me keep you safe while you recover. After that," he paused, and she saw him swallow hard against something that looked like grief. "After that, you can decide what you want. If you choose to reject the bond, I will let you go. It will not be easy, for either of us, but I will not hold you against your will. You have my word." Kira stared at him for a long moment, searching his scarred features for any sign of deception. She found nothing but raw, aching honesty, and beneath it, a loneliness so profound it made her heart clench in recognition. He had lost his pack, his kingdom, everyone he had ever loved. And now the fates had given him a mate who flinched at his very presence, who looked at him with fear instead of welcome, who could not bring herself to accept the bond that every wolf dreamed of finding. She thought of what it would cost him to let her go, to sever the mate bond, to spend the rest of his life with that emptiness inside him, knowing that his fated one had chosen to walk away. And she felt a small, fragile thing inside her. Wary hope, perhaps, soften just a fraction. "Water," she said finally. "Please, my throat." He moved before she finished speaking, reaching for a water skin that sat beside his bedroll and crossing the distance between them in 2 careful strides. But instead of handing it to her, instead of using the excuse to touch her, he stopped several feet away and held it out at arm's length, waiting for her to take it from him. Their fingers did not touch. He made certain of that. And when she raised the water skin to her cracked lips and drank deeply, he retreated to his original position across the fire without a single word of complaint. Kira lowered the water skin and looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since she had woken. He was still the most dangerous thing she had ever seen. Still huge and scarred and vibrating with barely contained power. But there was something else there too, something she hadn't noticed before. A gentleness in the way he held himself around her, a careful restraint in every movement, as if he was acutely aware of how easily he could frighten her, and was doing everything in his power to appear non-threatening. It shouldn't have mattered. It shouldn't have made any difference at all. But somehow, impossibly, it did. "The cave is warm," she said, and it wasn't what she meant to say at all. Brennan's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but something close. "I built the fire high. Your body temperature was dangerously low when I brought you here." "How long?" "Through the night. It's morning now. You should rest more." "I don't—" She tried to push herself up, and immediately gasped as her broken ribs screamed in protest. The world grayed at the edges, and she would have collapsed back against the bedroll if Brennan hadn't. But no, he hadn't moved. He was still sitting across the fire, his hands curled into fists, his entire body rigid with the effort of holding himself in place. She could see how desperately he wanted to go to her, to help her, to ease her pain. The bond between them was screaming at him to comfort his mate, and he was ignoring it. For her sake. Because she had asked him not to touch her. "I'm fine," she managed, even though she very clearly wasn't. "You're hurt," he corrected, his voice strained. Your ribs are broken. Your skull is fractured. You've lost blood, and you're fighting poison that's been building in your system for months." He paused, and his golden eyes met hers with devastating intensity. "You are not fine, Kira. But you will be. I'm going to make sure of it." She didn't know what to say to that. She didn't know how to process the absolute certainty in his voice, the conviction that radiated from every word. So she simply closed her eyes and lay back against the bedroll, letting the warmth of the fire and the steady presence of the mate she didn't know how to want wash over her like a tide. For 3 days, Brennan carried her. They traveled north, away from Frostborn territory, and toward whatever small camp of survivors waited for him. He carried her because she could not walk, her broken body unable to support her weight, and he held her with such exquisite care that she sometimes forgot to be afraid of his strength. Each night he made camp in whatever sheltered spot he could find, a stand of dense pines, a rocky overhang, once an abandoned hunter's cabin that smelled of dust and forgotten things. And each night, without fail, he performed the same ritual. He built her a fire. He laid out his bedroll for her and covered her with both blankets, while he sat guard in nothing but his shirt and leather trousers. He positioned himself between her and the forest, his massive frame a wall against whatever dangers might lurk in the darkness. And he did not touch her. Not once. Not even when she cried out from nightmares. Not even when her shaking became so violent that she thought she might fly apart from the force of it. He would speak to her then, his voice low and calm and steady, telling her stories of his lost pack until her breathing settled. But he never reached for her, never closed the distance between them. On the second night, she woke screaming. Owen's face was still burned into her vision, that beautiful, monstrous face, twisted with hatred as he pushed her down the stairs. She could feel herself falling again, could hear the crack of her bones against stone, could taste blood on her tongue, and feel the cold of the ravine seeping into her skin. "Kira." Brennan's voice cut through the nightmare like a blade. "You're safe. You're with me. He can't hurt you here." She was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. The fire had burned low, casting more shadows than light, and for one terrible moment she couldn't tell where she was, couldn't separate past from present, dream from reality. "Tell me something," she gasped, her hands clutching the blanket like a lifeline. "Tell me. Anything. Please. I can't make it stop." He didn't hesitate. He simply began to speak. "My mother was not a wolf," he said, his rough voice wrapping around her like a physical thing. "She was human, a healer from a village at the edge of our territory. My father found her tending to wounded travelers on the road. Bandits had attacked the caravan, and she was the only one who had stayed to help the survivors. He said later that he knew she was his mate before he even saw her face. Just from the way she moved. The way she refused to leave anyone behind." Kira's breathing began to slow. She focused on his voice, letting it anchor her, pulling her back from the edge of the abyss. "She was terrified of him at first," Brennan continued, and there was something distant in his tone, something almost wistful. "He was an alpha king, massive, powerful, covered in blood from the rogues he'd killed to protect the caravan. She thought he was going to eat her. She actually threw a healing poultice in his face and tried to run. Despite everything, Kira felt a tiny spark of something that might have been amusement. What happened? He chased her. Caught her, of course. She was human. She didn't stand a chance. And then he sat her down and told her exactly what she was to him, what they were to each other. And he gave her a choice." Brennan's golden eyes met hers across the dying fire. He told her that the bond was there, whether she wanted it or not. But that acting on it, claiming it, that was her decision. He would court her properly. He would give her time to know him, to trust him. And if, at the end of that time, she still didn't want him, His voice caught slightly. He would let her go. Kira was barely breathing. The nightmare had faded to nothing, replaced by this story, this glimpse into who this man was before tragedy had scarred him. What did she choose? Brennan's lips curved into something that was almost a smile. She made him wait for 2 years. 2 years of bringing her flowers, of learning her healing craft so he could help her work, of building her a cottage at the edge of the village so she didn't have to live in the pack house before she was ready. 2 years of proving himself worthy of her trust. The smile faded, replaced by something older and more painful. He used to say those were the best 2 years of his life, because every day he had to earn her. Every day he had to choose to be patient, to be gentle, to be the man she deserved. And when she finally let him mark her, he stopped, swallowed hard. He said it was worth every moment of waiting. Silence fell between them, broken only by the crackle of the dying fire. Kira lay there in the darkness, her hand pressed against her belly where her baby's heart still beat, and felt another piece of her armor fall away. "Your father sounds like a good man," she whispered finally. He was. The words were heavy with grief. They both were. They died together. When the rogues came, fighting side by side to protect what remained of the pack. My mother. His voice broke. She wasn't a fighter. She was a healer. But she picked up a sword and stood beside him, and she took 3 of them with her before. He stopped. Couldn't continue. And Kira, who had thought she had no more tears left, felt grief crack through her defenses like water through stone. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it with her whole heart. "I'm so sorry." "As am I." He met her gaze, and she saw his own grief reflected in those golden depths. "We have both lost more than anyone should have to bear, but we're still here, still breathing, and as long as we breathe, there is hope." She didn't know if she believed that. Hope had led her to Owen, to the wedding gown stained with blood, to the stone stairs and the long fall into darkness. Hope had nearly killed her, but as she lay there in the shelter of Brennan's watchful presence, she found that she could not quite bring herself to give up on it entirely. By the 3rd day, her ribs had begun to knit. The mate bond, pulsing constantly between them, seemed to be accelerating her healing in ways that should have been impossible. She could feel it working on her, feel the warmth spreading through her body wherever the bond touched, burning away the poison in her blood, mending the damage that Owen had done. Her wolf was waking. It was a slow process, like watching spring melt through winter ice. Each hour brought a little more strength, a little more awareness, until she could feel the creature inside her stirring restlessly, impatient to be free. The wolf wanted Brennan, wanted to run to him, to press against him, to bury her nose in his pine and smoke scent and never leave his side. Kira kept her clamped down firmly. She wasn't ready. She didn't know if she would ever be ready, but she couldn't deny that something was changing in her. Something fundamental. Something that had nothing to do with her wolf's instincts and everything to do with the man who carried her so carefully through the forest. He never complained about her weight, never showed any sign of fatigue, despite the fact that he hadn't slept more than a few hours in 3 days. He walked with steady, tireless purpose, and when she asked him where they were going, he simply said, "Home." They reached the Silvermane camp on the evening of the 3rd day. It was smaller than she had expected. A collection of rough shelters clustered around a central fire pit, barely 30 wolves moving through the clearing with the wary alertness of refugees who had not yet learned to feel safe. But there was something else there, too. Something she could see in the way they straightened when they caught sight of Brennan, the way hope flickered to life in eyes that had known too much despair. They loved him. These wolves who had lost everything, who had followed him out of the ashes of their destroyed kingdom, they loved him with a fierce, unwavering devotion that made Kira's breath catch in her throat. "Alpha." A man approached them, tall and lean with dark hair and a cruel twist to his mouth. He moved with the arrogance of high rank, and Kira felt her wolf bristle instinctively as his gaze swept over her. "You've returned, and I see you've brought company." The way he said company made it clear exactly what he thought of her. His eyes lingered on her torn wedding gown, on the bruises visible on her skin, on the obvious swell of her belly that wasn't there, but that he seemed to imagine anyway. "Beta Marcus," Brennan said, and his voice had gone cold in a way Kira hadn't heard before. "Mind your tone." "I mean no offense, Alpha." But the sneer was still there, barely hidden behind a mask of deference. "I simply wonder at the wisdom of bringing a stray into our camp, especially one who reeks of Frostborn." His eyes flicked to Kira again, and this time the contempt was open, unmistakable. "What exactly did you fish out of the ravine? Frostborn's discarded broodmare?" The world went very quiet. Kira felt something inside her recoil at the words, felt the shame and humiliation rise up in her throat like bile. She was still in Brennan's arms, still helpless and broken, and she couldn't even defend herself against. The crack of bone was shockingly loud. One moment Marcus was standing there with that cruel smirk on his face. The next he was on the ground, blood pouring from his jaw, and Brennan was standing over him with murder in his golden eyes. "Let me be absolutely clear," Brennan said, and his voice carried across the entire camp, carried to every wolf who had frozen in place, every pair of eyes now fixed on their alpha with shock and fear and dawning understanding. "This woman is under my protection. Any wolf who disrespects her challenges me directly. Any wolf who so much as looks at her wrong will answer to my claws." He reached down and hauled Marcus up by the throat, lifting the taller man off his feet as if he weighed nothing at all. Marcus choked, his hands scrabbling at Brennan's iron grip, and Kira saw genuine terror in his eyes. "She is not Frostborn's anything," Brennan continued, his voice deadly soft. "She is mine, my mate, my fated one, and the child she carries will be raised as my own. Do you understand me, Beta? Or do I need to make the lesson more permanent?" Marcus made a strangled sound that might have been assent. Brennan held him there for another long moment, letting the message sink in, and then dropped him unceremoniously to the ground. "Spread the word," Brennan said, still in that terrible, quiet voice. "Kira Bloodmoon is to be treated with the same respect you would show me. Anyone who forgets that will not forget twice." He turned then, lifting Kira again with that impossible gentleness, and carried her through the silent camp toward the largest of the shelters. She could feel every eye on them, could feel the shock and curiosity and calculation, but she couldn't bring herself to care about any of it. Because Brennan Silvermane, the Alpha King, the wolf without a pack, had just declared her his mate before everyone who followed him. He had defended her honor with violence and proclaimed her child as his own. He had done all of this for a woman who couldn't even bring herself to touch him, and she had no idea what to do with that. When they were alone in the shelter, a rough structure of logs and canvas that had clearly been constructed with more attention to function than comfort, Brennan set her down on a pile of furs with the same exquisite care he had shown throughout their journey. Then he stepped back, putting distance between them, and ran a hand through his silver hair with an expression that might have been embarrassment. "I apologize for the scene," he said quietly. "Marcus has always been—" He stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. "He will not trouble you again. I'll make certain of it." Kira stared at him for a long moment, emotions tangling inside her that she couldn't name. "You broke his jaw. He deserved worse. You called me your mate, in front of everyone. You are my mate." He said it simply, as if stating an obvious fact. "The bond exists whether we claim it or not. I will not hide what you are to me. Not from my pack, not from anyone. But She faltered, not knowing how to finish the sentence. She had not agreed to be his mate. She had not accepted the bond. She had asked him not to touch her, had flinched from his every movement, had given him nothing but fear and suspicion since the moment she woke in his care. And he had just stood before his entire pack and declared her precious. Brennan. It was the first time she had said his name. She saw him react to it, saw the slight catch in his breath, the way his golden eyes softened with cautious, fragile hope. I don't understand. Why would you do that? I can't even. I know. He moved to the entrance of the shelter, putting even more distance between them. I know you're not ready. I know you may never be ready. But that changes nothing for me, Kira. You are my mate, the only one I will ever have. And I will spend every moment of the rest of my life proving myself worthy of you, whether you ever choose to accept me or not. He ducked through the entrance before she could respond, leaving her alone with the warmth of the furs and the crackling fire and the impossible, overwhelming weight of everything he had just said. Kira lay there in the shelter that smelled of pine and wood smoke and Brennan, and felt the foundations of her fear begin to shift. A hairline fracture in the wall she had built around herself. The beginning, perhaps, of trust. The fragile thing growing in Kira's chest didn't shatter overnight. It grew slowly, cautiously, like a seedling pushing through frozen ground toward uncertain sunlight. In the days that followed Brennan's declaration, the camp transformed around her. Where there had been curious stares and whispered speculation, there was now careful deference. Wolves who had looked at her with suspicion now ducked their heads when she passed, murmuring respectful greetings. The women brought her extra furs, herbal teas that one of the older healers swore would strengthen the baby. The men gave her wide berth, their eyes sliding away from her swelling belly with something that might have been shame for Marcus's words. But it was Brennan who changed the most. He had always been careful with her, careful not to touch, careful not to crowd, careful to give her every choice he could. But now there was something else beneath the care. A tenderness that revealed itself in small moments. The way he personally brought her meals, testing each portion before handing her the bowl. The way he positioned himself between her and any door, any entrance, any possible threat without seeming to think about it. The way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, his golden eyes soft with something that made her chest ache. She caught him at it one evening, 3 days after their arrival, when she emerged from the shelter to find him standing guard in the falling dusk. He was speaking in low tones with a scarred female wolf she had come to know as Ilara, one of his few remaining warriors, and his face was animated with something like hope. Expanding the northern boundary once the pups are old enough to train. If we can secure the river crossing before winter. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw her, his entire body orienting toward her like a compass finding north. The hope in his expression flickered, replaced by that careful neutrality he wore whenever she was near, as if he was afraid of wanting too much, of frightening her with the depth of what he felt. Kira. Her name and his voice still did something to her, made her wolf stir and stretch, made warmth pool in places she tried not to think about. Do you need something? Are you hungry? Cold? I'm fine. She wrapped her arms around herself, aware of Ilara's curious gaze. I just needed air. He nodded, then seemed to hesitate. Would you like company? Ilara and I were just finishing. The female wolf took the hint gracefully, offering Kira a small bow before melting into the shadows. And then, it was just the two of them, standing in the purple twilight with the sounds of the camp settling around them. You should rest, Brennan said, but he didn't move toward her. Didn't try to usher her back inside. Just stood there, massive and silver-haired and impossibly patient, waiting for her to decide. I've been resting for days. Kira moved to stand beside him, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Her wolf pressed against the inside of her skin, wanting closer. She ignored it. Tell me about your pack, The one you lost. Pain flashed across his features, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. That's not a story for a pleasant evening. I don't need pleasant. She kept her eyes on the horizon, watching the first stars emerge. I need to understand who you are. What happened to make you the man who catches falling strangers and never asks for anything in return? For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he lowered himself to sit on a fallen log, leaving space beside him that was clearly an invitation rather than a demand. Kira hesitated, then sat, not quite touching, but close. The Silvermane Pack was one of the oldest in the Northern Territories, he began, his voice low and rough. 300 wolves at our peak. We held the mountain passes, kept the peace between the Highland clans. My father was Alpha before me, and his father before him. I thought... He stopped, swallowed. I thought it would last forever. What happened? Politics, greed, the usual poisons that rot packs from the inside. His hands curled into fists on his thighs. There was another Alpha, Varin Shadowfang. He wanted our territory, our resources, our trade routes. But he was too weak to challenge us directly, so he did it slowly, turned our allies against us, spread rumors that the Silvermane bloodline was cursed, waited until we were isolated, vulnerable. Kira watched his profile in the dying light, saw the way his jaw tightened with remembered fury. And then he attacked. 3 packs against 1, in the dead of winter when we couldn't run. They came through the eastern pass at dawn, and they... His voice cracked. He breathed through it, steady and slow, the way she had learned to breathe through her own pain. They didn't just defeat us, they slaughtered us. Women, children, the elderly, anyone who couldn't fight, he couldn't finish, didn't need to. Kira understood. She had her own nightmares of violence, her own scars that didn't show on the surface. The 30 wolves here, she said quietly, they're all that's left. All that's left. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. The survivors of the Silvermane Pack, the ones who were away hunting when the attack came, the ones who made it to the passes before Varin's wolves could catch them. He turned to look at her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I was supposed to protect them. I was their Alpha, and I failed. You saved who you could. Not enough. Never enough. She didn't know what possessed her to do it. Some instinct that bypassed the fear, that recognized a wound too deep to be left untended. She reached out and placed her hand over his fist, feeling the tension in his muscles, the warmth of his skin. He went absolutely still. Kira's heart was pounding, her wolf howling with approval, but she didn't pull away. She let her hand rest there, feeling him tremble beneath her touch like she was something precious and fragile that might shatter if he moved wrong. You're still fighting, she said softly. Still building, still protecting. That's not failure, Brennan. That's survival. He didn't speak. Couldn't. Maybe. But slowly, so slowly, he turned his hand beneath hers until their palms pressed together. His fingers threaded through hers with exquisite care, like he expected her to bolt at any second. She didn't bolt. They sat there in the darkness, hand in hand, while the camp quieted around them and the stars wheeled overhead. And when Kira finally rose to return to the shelter, Brennan didn't try to follow. But she saw him touch his palm where her skin had warmed it, saw him close his eyes like he was memorizing the sensation. She dreamed that night of running through moonlit forests, a great silver wolf at her side. The messenger arrived 3 days later. Kira was sitting by the central fire, carefully braiding strips of leather for new boot laces, a task one of the older women had taught her, saying idle hands made for troubled minds, when she heard the commotion at the edge of the camp. Shouts, then growls, Then the unmistakable sound of Brennan's voice cutting through the noise like a blade. She rose, one hand instinctively going to her belly, and made her way toward the gathering crowd. Her wolf was restless, hackles raised, and she felt the bond in her chest pull tight with warning. By the time she reached the source of the disturbance, a ring of Silvermane wolves had formed around a stranger. He was young, barely more than a pup, with a shock of dark hair and wild eyes. He wore the colors of the Frostborn pack. Kira's blood turned to ice. "Demands the return of his mate," the messenger was saying, his voice cracking with fear as Brennan loomed over him. Alpha Owen claims she was abducted, that she belongs to Frostborn pack by right of marriage. He gives you 3 days to return her, or what? Brennan's voice was the sound of distant thunder, low and full of warning. The messenger swallowed hard. "Or he will come with the full force of 3 allied packs to take her back. And he will burn your camp to the ground as punishment for your interference." Silence fell over the gathered wolves. Kira felt eyes turn to her, felt the weight of their stares, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Owen was coming. Owen knew where she was. Owen was going to drag her back to that stone staircase and finish what he started. No. The thought cut through her panic like a shaft of light. No. She was not going back. She would die first. She would die fighting, with her teeth in his throat, before she let him touch her child. Brennan turned, scanning the crowd until his eyes found her. The fury in his expression shifted to something else when he saw her face. Concern, tenderness, fierce protectiveness. He moved toward her, putting himself between her and the messenger, and she felt the bond flare between them. "Kira." His voice was gentle, meant only for her. "Go back to the shelter. I'll handle this." "No." The word surprised both of them. She stepped forward, around him, and faced the trembling messenger with her chin raised. "Tell Owen Frostborn that I am not his mate. I was never his mate. The bond never formed between us because he was poisoning me from the day we married, trying to kill my wolf so I could never challenge him." The messenger's eyes went wide. I don't. Tell him I know what he did to his father. I know how he became Alpha. I know about the poison he put in the old Alpha's food for months before he finally challenged a man too weak to fight back." Her voice grew stronger with each word, her wolf lending her courage. "Tell him that if he comes here, I will tell every wolf in every pack the truth about what he is. A poisoner, a murderer, a coward who throws pregnant women downstairs." The messenger looked like he might faint. Behind her, she heard Brennan make a sound that might have been approval. "Go," she said. "Deliver your message, and then run, little wolf, because if you're still in Frostborn pack when the truth comes out, you'll burn with the rest of them." The messenger ran. When he was gone, swallowed by the forest, the gathered wolves erupted into noise. Questions, exclamations, demands for explanation. But Kira heard none of it. She was trembling, the adrenaline draining out of her, and when her knees buckled, Brennan was there to catch her. He always seemed to be there to catch her. "Easy," he murmured, lifting her into his arms. "I have you. Easy." She let herself be carried back to the shelter, let herself be settled among the furs, with the warmth of the fire washing over her. Brennan knelt beside her, one hand hovering near her face like he wanted to touch, but was afraid to presume. "You were magnificent," he said quietly. "Terrifying, but magnificent." "I was terrified." She laughed, a little hysterical. I couldn't stop the words from coming out. "He's going to kill me now. He's going to bring those 3 packs and he's not going to touch you." Brennan's voice was iron. "I don't care if he brings every wolf in the territory, I will die before I let him near you. You can't fight 3 packs with 30 wolves. Then I'll fight them alone." She stared at him, saw the absolute certainty in his eyes, and felt the last of her resistance crumble. He meant it. This man she had known for barely a week. This alpha without a pack, this king without a kingdom. He would walk into certain death for her, for the bond, for what she might someday be to him. Why? She whispered. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch was feather-light, reverent. Because you're my mate, he said simply. Because your heart calls to mine in ways I don't have words for. Because when I caught you falling out of that darkness, something in me that had been dead for years started breathing again. His thumb traced her cheekbone, barely there. I don't need you to love me, Kira. I don't need you to accept the bond. But I need you to live. I need you to survive. And I will do whatever it takes to make that happen. She should have pulled away, should have rebuilt the walls he kept crumbling with his gentleness, his patience, his impossible devotion. Instead, she turned her face into his palm and let herself feel safe. The attack came before the 3 days were up. Owen Frostborn was not known for his patience or his honor, and Kira should have expected that he would strike without warning. But she had allowed herself to hope, foolishly, desperately, that she might have time to heal. Time to let her wolf grow stronger, time to figure out what she felt for the silver-haired alpha who looked at her like she was the moon itself. They came at dawn, when the camp was just waking, when the guards were changing shifts, when Brennan was 300 yards away checking the northern boundary. Kira heard the screams first, high, terrified, cut short. Then the howls, dozens of them, rising from the forest like a tide of sound that crashed over the camp and left chaos in its wake. She stumbled out of the shelter to find wolves everywhere, frostborn wolves, their dark fur matted with the blood of centuries, pouring through the gaps in the camp's defenses. Silvermane wolves shifting mid-stride, throwing themselves at the attackers with the desperation of those who have nothing left to lose. And in the center of it all, striding through the carnage with a smile on his face, was Owen. He was exactly as she remembered him, tall and dark-haired, handsome in a way that had once made her heart flutter, cruel in a way that had made her learn to flinch. He wore his human form like a weapon, and his eyes swept the chaos until they found her. There you are, wife. His voice carried over the sounds of battle, sweet and reasonable and terrible. I've come to take you home. Kira's wolf surged against her skin, snarling, straining, desperate to shift. Her healing had progressed remarkably, the bones mended, the bruises faded, the poison nearly purged. But nearly was not completely. She could feel her wolf clawing at the barrier that still separated them, could feel the shift tantalizingly close but not quite within reach. Not yet. Not when she needed it most. No. No. She would not be helpless. Not again. Not when Brennan's people were bleeding for her. Not when everything she might have been was being ripped away before she could claim it. She ran. Not away. Toward the shelter where she knew Brennan kept his weapons. Toward the knife she had seen him sharpen by firelight, the one he had told her was hers if she ever wanted it. Toward anything that might give her a chance. Owen laughed behind her, the sound of a predator amused by prey. Run, little wolf. It makes this more fun. She burst into the shelter, grabbed the knife from its place by the fire, and spun around just as Owen's massive form filled the doorway. He was still smiling, still confident, still certain that she was nothing more than the weak, broken woman he had thrown down those stairs. Put that down before you hurt yourself, he said, taking a step closer. You know you can't fight me. You've never been able to fight me. Kira's hand trembled on the hilt. Her wolf howled with rage, but her body remembered the pain, the fear, the helplessness. Remembered how many times she had tried to resist and failed. I'm not going back. Her voice cracked. I'll die first. That can be arranged. Owen's smile twisted into something ugly. But first, you're going to tell me what you told that messenger. You're going to take back every word. And then we'll discuss whether I let you live long enough to give birth to that bastard in your belly before I kill you both. He lunged. Kira raised the knife, bracing herself, knowing she was too slow, too weak, knowing this was how it ended. And a silver blur exploded through the side of the shelter and slammed into Owen with the force of an avalanche. Brennan, in his massive wolf form, his fur the color of moonlight, his eyes blazing gold with killing fury. He and Owen went down in a tangle of teeth and claws, and the sounds they made were not human or wolf, but something primal and terrible. Kira pressed herself against the far wall, the knife still clutched in her shaking hand, and watched the two alphas fight for her life. Outside, the sounds of battle were changing. More Silvermane howls, fewer Frostborn. Someone was shouting orders, and she thought she recognized Alara's voice, but she couldn't look away from the shelter entrance, couldn't think of anything except Brennan's massive form and the blood that was beginning to stain his silver fur. Owen was fighting dirty, as he always did, feinting and retreating, looking for weakness, waiting for his moment. And Brennan was slower than he should have been, still recovering from the wounds of his pack's destruction, still carrying the weight of too many losses. When Owen's jaws closed on Brennan's foreleg and she heard the sickening crack of bone, Kira screamed. Brennan went down, and Owen was on him instantly, teeth at his throat, ready to tear. And Kira moved. She didn't think, didn't plan. Just threw herself at the dark wolf with the knife extended, burying the blade to the hilt in his shoulder. Owen howled, releasing Brennan, spinning to face this new threat. His eyes found Kira, and they were full of such rage, such hatred, that she knew she had signed her death warrant. You, he snarled, shifting to human form with the knife still protruding from his flesh. You dare. Brennan rose behind him, broken leg dragging, and his massive jaws closed on Owen's throat from behind. The Frostborn Alpha had time for one more expression of surprise before the Silver King tore his throat out. Owen's body crumpled to the blood-soaked ground, and for a long moment, the only sound was Brennan's ragged breathing and the distant chaos of battle still raging through the camp. Kira stood frozen, her hand still extended from where she had driven the knife into Owen's shoulder, her entire body trembling with the aftermath of what she had done, what they had done together. Brennan's wolf form shimmered and dissolved, leaving him kneeling in the wreckage of the shelter, his left leg bent at an angle that made Kira's stomach lurch. Blood streamed from a dozen wounds across his chest and arms, and his silver hair was matted with gore that might have been his own or Owen's or both. But his eyes were clear and golden and fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. Kira. Her name on his lips was a prayer, a question, a declaration all at once. Are you hurt? Did he? I'm fine. The words came out strange and distant, like someone else was speaking them. She couldn't stop staring at Owen's body, at the ruin of his throat, at the way his dark eyes had gone glassy and empty. The man who had haunted her nightmares for months, who had poisoned her slowly and smiled while he did it, who had thrown her down those stairs and left her for dead, he was gone. Really, truly gone. She should have felt triumph, relief, something. Instead, she felt hollow, scraped clean, like a vessel waiting to be filled with something new. Kira. Brennan's voice was stronger now, pulling her back to the present. He had dragged himself closer, leaving a trail of blood across the ruined floor of the shelter, and his hand closed around her ankle. Not demanding, just anchoring. Look at me, please. She tore her gaze from Owen's corpse and met Brennan's eyes, and felt her heart lurch with fierce, protective love. He was so pale beneath the blood, so obviously in agony from his shattered leg, but he wasn't looking at his own wounds. He was looking at her, like she was the only thing in the world that mattered, like the battle still raging outside and the dead man between them were nothing compared to making sure she was whole. The baby, he said, and his voice broke on the word. Is the baby? Kira's hand flew to her belly, pressing hard against the barely there swell. She hadn't even thought, hadn't had time to think. But as she focused inward, she could feel it. That tiny spark of life, still burning steady, still holding on despite everything. Her wolf stirred weakly in response, and for the first time since Owen had appeared in the camp, Kira felt tears burn her eyes. Safe, she whispered. We're both safe. Brennan's whole body sagged with relief, and his forehead dropped to rest against her knee. She felt the dampness of blood, and maybe tears, though she would never say so, soaking through the rough fabric of her borrowed clothes. His shoulders shook once, twice, and then he was still. Outside, the sounds of battle were changing. More howls of triumph than screams of pain, more Silvermane voices than Frostborn. Kira could hear Alara shouting orders, her voice carrying over the chaos with the authority of someone who had been forged in war and refused to break. We need to get you to a healer, Kira said, the practical concern cutting through her shock. Your leg. We'll wait. Brennan lifted his head, and his jaw was set with stubborn determination. Help me up. I need to be seen. My wolves need to know their alpha still stands. She wanted to argue, wanted to push him back down and find Alara, and make someone tend to his wounds before he bled out on the ruined floor of this shelter. But she could see the iron in his eyes, could feel through the nascent bond how desperately he needed to be strong for his people in this moment. So she moved to his side, ducking under his arm, bracing herself to take as much of his weight as her smaller frame could bear. He hissed when he put pressure on his broken leg, but he didn't fall. He leaned into her, his arm wrapped around her shoulders, and together they stepped out into the aftermath of battle. The camp was chaos. Bodies lay scattered across the trampled ground, most of them wearing the darker colors of Frostborn, she noted with grim satisfaction. Near the eastern perimeter, she spotted Beta Marcus's crumpled form, his throat torn out by what looked like multiple attackers. Even in death, his face wore that cruel sneer. Silvermane wolves moved among the fallen, checking for survivors, securing prisoners, helping their own wounded. The air smelled of blood and smoke, and the sharp ozone tang of expended power. Later, she would learn what had happened, how Kira's words to the messenger had spread like wildfire through the Frostborn ranks, how whispers of Owen's patricide had reached the allied packs before the attack even began. Half of Owen's reinforcements had turned back at the border, unwilling to die for a murderer and a poisoner. Others had switched sides mid-battle when they saw their alpha's true nature revealed. When the nearest wolves saw Brennan emerge from the shelter, a ragged cheer went up. It spread through the camp like wildfire, wolves lifting their voices in triumph, in relief, in the primal celebration of victory won against impossible odds. And when they saw Kira at his side, supporting him, covered in Owen's blood with her chin held high. The cheers grew louder. Alara appeared at their side, her face streaked with blood and soot, her amber eyes blazing with fierce joy. She took in Brennan's condition with a healer's quick assessment and immediately ducked under his other arm, helping to bear his weight. The Frostborn Alpha? She asked, already knowing the answer from the look in Kira's eyes. Dead, Brennan said. By my mate's blade and my teeth. The word mate rang through the air like a bell, resonating through the bond that hummed between them like a living thing. She hadn't heard him say it since those first days in the cave, hadn't dared to hope he still meant it after everything she had put him through. But the way he said it now, with pride, with certainty, with the kind of possessive tenderness that made her wolf keen with longing, left no room for doubt. Then it's over, Alara breathed. It's really over. Not yet. Brennan's voice was stronger now, fueled by the energy of his people's triumph. There are still frostborn wolves who need to choose: submit or die. And my wounds need tending before I finish what we started here tonight. The next hours passed in a blur of activity that Kira would later remember only in fragments. She stayed by Brennan's side as Ilara set his leg, holding his hand while he bit back screams of agony, refusing to leave even when he told her she needed rest. She watched as the surviving frostborn wolves were brought before him in chains, some defiant, some terrified, most simply exhausted and confused about what they were supposed to do now that their alpha was dead. Brennan dealt with each of them fairly, offering them a choice that Owen had never given anyone: submit to his rule and become part of the Silvermane Pack, or leave these lands and never return. Most chose submission. A few chose exile. None chose to fight. When the last of them had been processed and the camp had settled into something approaching calm, Kira finally allowed herself to collapse onto the pallet in Brennan's tent, the tent they had given her when she first arrived, which was now surrounded by guards and treated like the residence of a queen. She was dimly aware of Ilara pressing food and water into her hands, of the older woman checking her pulse and the baby's health and declaring them both miraculously unharmed. And then she slept, deep and dreamless, for the first time since Owen had thrown her down those stairs. She woke to warmth, not the warmth of blankets or fire, but the warmth of another body pressed against her back, a heavy arm draped over her waist, breath stirring the hair at the nape of her neck. She knew that scent: pine and wood smoke, and something wild and purely Brennan. Her wolf stirred lazily, content in a way that Kira had never felt before. "You're awake." His voice was a low rumble against her shoulder, thick with sleep and something else. Something that made heat pool low in her belly despite everything that had happened. "How long was I out?" "Almost a full day." His arm tightened around her, pulling her closer. "You needed it. Ilara said your body is still purging the last of the poison, and the baby—" His voice cracked slightly. "The baby is strong. A fighter. Like her mother." Her. Kira felt tears prick her eyes. She hadn't known, hadn't even thought to wonder, but somehow the word felt right. A daughter. A little girl who would never know the cruelty of Owen Frostborn, who would grow up surrounded by pack and protection and the fierce love of the alpha who had claimed her as his own before she was even born. Brennan. She turned in his arms, facing him for the first time since she'd woken. His face was pale but healing, the worst of his wounds already closed thanks to his alpha metabolism and Ilara's skill. But his eyes, those amber depths that had haunted her dreams since the moment she first saw them in that cave, were shadowed with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to answer honestly, even if the answer isn't what I want to hear." Fear spiked through her chest. After everything they had been through, after everything he had done for her, was he going to send her away? Had she been wrong about what she felt through the bond, wrong about what she saw in his eyes when he looked at her? Ask. He took a deep breath, and his hand came up to cup her face with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "The mate bond," he said slowly. "You know what it means, what it demands. But I also know that you've had no choice in any of this. You were running for your life when I found you, fighting for survival. And I was just there. If you want to reject the bond, if you want to take your child and go somewhere safe and never look back, I won't stop you. I would never cage you, Kira. Not after everything you've survived." She stared at him, speechless. He was giving her a choice. After claiming her publicly, after killing for her, after declaring before his entire pack that her child would be raised as his, he was offering to let her go. Her wolf snarled at the very suggestion, clawing at her insides with an urgency that bordered on pain. But it wasn't her wolf's reaction that mattered. It was hers. Her choice. Her decision. She thought about Owen, and the way he had never once asked what she wanted. Thought about her childhood pack, who had traded her away like currency. Thought about every moment of her life when her wishes had been irrelevant, her needs unimportant, her voice silenced before she could even speak. And then she thought about Brennan, building her a separate fire, telling her stories until she could breathe again, breaking a man's jaw for speaking ill of her, saying she was never yours with such conviction that she had almost believed it. She thought about the way he looked at her, like she was precious, like she was powerful, like she was worthy of every ounce of devotion he had to give. "You're not a cage," she whispered. "You're home." The sound that escaped him was somewhere between a growl and a sob. He crushed her against his chest, burying his face in her hair, and she could feel his whole body shaking with the force of his emotion. The mate bond surged between them, bright and warm and overwhelming, and Kira pressed herself closer, breathing him in, letting herself want this, letting herself have this. "Mate," he said against her temple, and the word was reverent now. Sacred. "My mate." Not yet. The words came out stronger than she expected, and she felt him still against her. "Not officially. The bond isn't complete." He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, and she saw understanding dawn in his expression. His gaze dropped to the juncture of her neck and shoulder, the place where a claiming bite would mark her as his for all the world to see. When he looked back up, his eyes were blazing gold, and his voice was rough with desire and barely leashed restraint. "Are you sure? We don't have to. Not tonight. Not until you're ready." "I've never been more sure of anything." She reached up and traced the scar that ran down his cheek, the old wound that spoke of battles survived and losses endured. "I want this, Brennan. I want you. I want our daughter to be born to parents who have claimed each other fully, who belong to each other in every way that matters." The growl that rumbled through his chest was pure alpha, pure possession, pure need. But his hands were gentle as they cradled her face, as he tilted her head back and lowered his mouth to hover just above hers. "Tell me if you want to stop," he breathed against her lips. "At any moment, for any reason." "I won't." She closed the distance between them, and the kiss was everything she had never dared to dream, tender and fierce, desperate and patient. His mouth moved against hers with a reverence that made her eyes sting, and when his tongue swept across her lower lip, she opened for him without hesitation. The mate bond sang between them, urging them closer, demanding completion. She could feel his desire through the link, feel how much he wanted her, how long he had been holding himself back, but she could also feel his fear of hurting her, of overwhelming her, of moving too fast after everything she had endured at Owen's hands. She broke the kiss just long enough to pull back and meet his eyes. "I'm not afraid of you. I could never be afraid of you." Something shifted in his expression. The last traces of restraint crumbled, and he rolled them so she was beneath him, his massive frame caging her against the pallet but never crushing, never trapping. He was everywhere, his scent, his warmth, the electric awareness of his skin against hers, and Kira arched into him, craving more. He kissed his way down her jaw, her throat, and she felt the moment his lips found the pulse point at the base of her neck. His breath came hot and ragged against her skin, and she felt the brush of his teeth. Not biting, not yet, just testing, claiming. "Here," he murmured against her throat. "This is where I'll mark you, where everyone will see that you're mine." "Yes." The word was a plea and a promise. "Please, Brennan." His teeth sank into her flesh. The pain was sharp and bright, a lightning strike that arced through her entire body. She cried out, her back bowing off the pallet, her fingers digging into his shoulders hard enough to draw blood. For one endless moment, there was nothing but the agony of it. The tearing, the claiming, the irrevocable claiming that could never be undone. And then, the pain transformed. Pleasure flooded through her in waves, cascading from the point of his bite to every nerve ending in her body. She felt the bond rip open between them, felt herself pour into him, and him pour into her. His grief and his hope, and his fierce, overwhelming love crashing against her consciousness like a tidal wave. She saw flashes of his memories, a pack destroyed, flames against the night sky, the faces of wolves he had failed to save. She felt his loneliness, the years of isolation, the moment he had caught her falling body and known with absolute certainty that she was his purpose, his reason, his everything. And she felt his future, their future, stretching out before them like a promise. Children and pack, and the kind of love that songs were written about, the kind of love that changed the world. Mine. He growled against her throat, his tongue soothing the wound even as his teeth held fast. You're mine, Kira. Forever. Yours. The word tore out of her on a sob. Always yours. He released her slowly, reverently, and when he lifted his head, his eyes burned like twin suns, blazing with the power of the completed bond. The bite mark on her throat throbbed with a warm, steady pulse that matched her heartbeat. That matched his heartbeat, she realized. They were connected now in a way that could never be severed. But they weren't done yet. Kira surged up before he could pull away, her hands fisting in his silver hair, and she saw surprise flash across his face before she buried her teeth in his shoulder. She wasn't gentle about it. Couldn't be gentle, not with the bond screaming for completion, not with her wolf howling in triumph, not with months of helplessness and fear and silent rage pouring out of her in a single, savage bite. Her teeth broke through skin and muscle, and she tasted his blood on her tongue, copper and salt and something wild and ancient that made her wolf keen with satisfaction. She felt him shudder against her, felt the shock ripple through the bond followed by a wave of pleasure so intense it nearly overwhelmed her. His arms came around her, crushing her against his chest, and the sound he made was not quite human, a growl and a moan, and her name all tangled together. Kira! His voice cracked. Kira, mate. Yes. She bit down harder, and the bond exploded. Everything she had given him came flooding back, but doubled, tripled, magnified beyond anything she could have imagined. She felt herself as he saw her, brave and fierce and beautiful, a survivor who had crawled out of hell and come out fighting. She felt his pride in her, his desire, his absolute devotion. She felt the way he had fallen in love with her over those 3 days in the wilderness, watching her sleep, listening to her breathe, daring to hope for the first time since his pack had burned. She felt him recognize her as his Luna, his equal, his queen. When she finally released him, they were both trembling. He pressed his forehead to hers, and his breath came in ragged gasps that matched her own. She could feel the bond humming between them, settled and strong and unbreakable. Could feel his heartbeat in her own chest, his wolf curled around hers in perfect harmony. Mine, she whispered, and the word felt different in her mouth now. Powerful, true. His laugh was shaky, wet, completely undone. Yours. Always and forever, Kira. Yours. They held each other as the night deepened around them, as the bond settled into something warm and eternal, as the pack moved quietly around their tent and gave their alpha and his mate the privacy they needed. Kira traced the mark on Brennan's shoulder. Her mark. Her claim. The proof that he belonged to her as completely as she belonged to him, and felt a peace she had never known was possible. She was no longer Owen's discarded wife. She was no longer a broken woman running for her life. She was Luna of the Silvermane Pack, mate to the Alpha King, and no one would ever make her feel small again. 3 months later, Kira stood on the steps of what had once been the Frostborn pack house, watching as representatives from 6 different packs bent their knees before her mate. The alliance that Owen had built through fear and manipulation had crumbled with his death, and in its place, something new was rising, a coalition based on respect, on mutual protection, on the strength of wolves who chose to stand together rather than tear each other apart. Brennan stood beside her, tall and silver-haired and scarred, his hand resting possessively on the swell of her belly. Their daughter kicked at the pressure, and Kira saw his lips curve into that soft smile that was reserved only for her and their child. When the ceremony was complete and the new alliance sealed, Alara appeared at Kira's side with a knowing look. "It's time," the healer said quietly. "She's coming." The labor was long and hard, but Brennan never left her side. He held her hand through every contraction, whispered encouragement through every scream, and when their daughter finally entered the world with a cry that echoed through the pack house, he caught her with hands that trembled with reverence. "She's perfect," he breathed, cradling the tiny bundle against his scarred chest. The baby's hair was dark like Kira's, her features delicate and new. When her eyes finally opened, they were a soft gray blue that all newborns shared, too early to tell what color they would become. Our miracle, our perfect, impossible miracle. Alara had explained it to her weeks ago, when Kira had finally dared to ask about the child's origins. The mate bond transforms everything it touches, the healer had said. When you accepted Brennan fully, when you claimed each other, the bond recognized him as her father in the ways that matter. Not blood, perhaps, but something deeper. Something magic understands even if science cannot. Kira reached for them both, pulling her family close, and felt the bond pulse with so much joy that it nearly stopped her heart. This was what she had survived for. This was what all the pain and fear and fighting had been leading to. Not just survival, but this. Love and safety and a future filled with possibility. That night, as their daughter slept peacefully in her cradle and the pack celebrated below, Brennan traced the scar of Kira's bite on his shoulder with gentle fingers. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For falling." His eyes met hers, golden and warm and filled with a love so deep it made her breath catch. "For letting me catch you. For choosing to stay." Kira leaned into him, pressing her lips to the mark she had made, feeling their bond hum with contentment. "Thank you for never letting go." Outside their window, the moon rose over a pack at peace, Silvermane and Frostborn united, enemies become family, a legacy of cruelty replaced by something stronger and kinder and true. Somewhere beyond the mountains, Varin Shadowfang still drew breath, still plotted, still nursed his hatred for the Silvermane bloodline. But that was a battle for another day. Tonight, there was only this. And at the heart of it all, 2 wolves who had found each other in the darkness and built a light that would never go out. The Alpha King and his Luna Queen. Together, forever. Unbreakable. Home.